so much. Welcome everyone to the Metro Arts Commission Grants and Funding Committee meeting. Today is May 19th, 2025. I'm wondering if I'd like to read the statement first. Pursuant to the provisions of 2.68030 of the Metropolitan Code of Laws, please take notice that decisions of the Arts Commission may be appealed to the Chancery Court of Davidson County for review under a common law writ of certiorari. Any appeal must be filed within 60 days after entry of a final decision by the Commission. Any person or other entity considering an appeal should consult with an attorney to ensure that time and procedural requirements are met. And with that, I will call the meeting to order. Could we do a quick roll call? Vivian, is that okay?
We sure can.
Thank you.
All right, Commissioner Lefkowitz,
Here.
Commissioner Jester,
Here.
Commissioner Knight,
Here.
Commissioner Wade, here. Commissioner Khalil, here. Executive Director Batchelder,
Here.
Grants Manager Sydney Davis,
Here.
and myself, Vivian Fox, are all here. And we also now have our Finance Operations Administrator, Ms. Capri Hairston, that is present with us as well.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you all for being here and for all of your work. We'll move right into public comment for today. So Vivian, did we receive any online public comment?
We did not receive any online, but we do have one in person today.
Great, one in person.
Yes.
So, yes, let's do that. And just a reminder that the public comment period is limited to 20 minutes, but comments are limited to a maximum of 2 minutes per person. And persons can provide comment on matters that are germane to items of the agenda. So yes, let's.
All right. Our one public comment today, if you would like to come to the podium, Miss Celine Smith-Wilson. And give me 1 second. Is it on? All right, I will let you know when you're at your 1 minute mark. Your time starts now.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here on the second term of the meeting with the Metro Commission Board. I'm excited to know more and more about the Metro Arts grants and the procedures in getting into the program so that I can help my community. I'm just wanting to let you all know I don't have any questions. I did get a great response from the staff members that I reached out to, and they reached out quickly to me. So I was excited to get needed information that I did not know about the committee and how to help my community. So I just wanted to let you all know I was very excited when I first came for the first meeting, and I wanted to come this time because, should I proceed? I actually wanted to see the faces that and put the names to the people that was excited about getting me started. So that's all I had to say. But like I said, I had a lot of projects that came out of Louisville. If you have not been there, the walking path of Louisville's walking paths is my design that they reached out to me because I like to do artistry with drawings and so forth. And I am on the committee for the urban housing phase 4 design, and I've done designs there also. But the thing of it is, I'm excited because I am doing projects I like to do with help with the seniors in art, actually having programs. Next year, I'm hoping to get with the municipal building to have their derby in Nashville, which I've done 3 years. This will be my 4th year next year. So hopefully you all will get to see me in a broader arena, and this will be my first outside of the community event. Thank you.
Thank you so much for coming, and recognize you from last meeting too, and just appreciate you coming, and so glad to hear that you got a good response from staff, and we're excited to see your application for sure. Thank you. Is that any more public comment? That's it?
That ends public comment.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Let's move into item C, approval of the minutes. So we are approving minutes, which you have for April 24th, 2005. You have those minutes before you, and if you've had a chance to review them, I would take a motion.
I move we approve the minutes from the April 24th meeting.
Got to have a second from Commissioner Wade. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed? Abstentions? Motion carries, so those meetings are approved, and thank you so much for those. And we'll move right into discussion items. So moving first, we've got 2 discussion items, 25 and 26. And if we could move to fiscal year 25 updates. I know we have here finally a 1-page timeline. We've gotten down to a 1-page timeline, which is great. So are there updates there that you'd like to share, Interim Director?
Yeah, so the next slide shows what you have on the handout in front of you on the table, and this looks very similar to the short timeline that we shared last month as our status updates. It's just updates to the numbers of where we are with contracting and invoicing and payments. And so, again, we have 165 grantees for this current cycle. We have 163 fully executed contracts, and so that difference of 2 contracts are ones that we are waiting for from the grantee. And so we cannot process any payments until we have signatures from grantees, and then all of the Metro signatories, and the grantee is the one that signs first to initiate that process. And so we do not have contracts from two remaining ones yet. And then just the next row there is about invoicing and payments. And so of our 165 grantees, 159 are paid. This was as of Friday, May 16th, so a few days ago. And so of the remaining 6, 2 of those are approved. They should be paid this week. One is pending, so there might be some missing information in that one that's still being troubleshooting. One we're waiting for a correction, a paper check went to a bad address, and again, the 2 that we don't have an executed contract for, we cannot initiate a payment for. And so these are really just the last loose ends, and we had a few loose ends that we tied up at the end of last week. I think it was 19 that we were troubleshooting when we brought you the update last month, so we're down to just those 6. And so it's those last few ones that have some kind of missing information in the vendor system or just glitches that we have to troubleshoot. And so we're down to the final 6. Any questions on that?
Thank you to the staff, all of you, for getting this through. It's been epic, I know, and hopefully these remaining can just be wrapped up without too much more labor. So that's amazing. Any questions from the committee about 25? We can go on and move to 26. Updates, FY26. And here on the agenda, we wanted to talk about preliminary criteria and guidelines, and then timeline updates. Just to be clear, and hopefully you saw that email from Interim Director Batchelder, but we originally had intended to, I think, vote on some of these things today, but we've decided to defer that until next month just to make sure that we get our T's crossed and I's dotted, and that should not affect our timeline overall in terms of our goal of getting money out to applicants by the end of the year. So do you want to talk about the criteria and the guidelines as a discussion item, so not a voting item?
Yeah, and so happy to answer more questions about why we thought sort of 1 month. Let's make sure that we get everything right for a smooth rollout based on the things that we learn need, further tweaks and development. And we just thought that some of these discussions would benefit from, or some of these topics would benefit from discussion with you all. And so that we make sure that we don't have questions around some of the points of confusion that might have come up over this cycle. And so this meeting allows us to have that conversation instead of us saying, well, here's the conversation and now vote. So we sent out a 1 or a 1.5 pager of some of the sort of potential policy decisions, some that are new, some that are updates, some that are improvements of our current guidelines. And so we're going to go through those, and we have a slide or two for each one, and I'll sort of give the explanation based on the slide. Sydney will weigh in as well. We'll kind of go back and forth when we're presenting this, and then with each slide, we want to just have discussion about what you all think. And then, like Commissioner Lefkowitz said, we have an adjusted timeline that you have on the table that we'll go through at the end. And then we sent you also exported copies of the current applications. We think it's important that commissioners know what the application looks like on the applicant side, especially because we know that you hear from folks that have questions about the applications. And so depending where we are with how much time our discussion takes, we can take a closer look at the applicants just so you kind of see it from all sides. So that's what we have planned. And with that, we'll go to the next slide here. And so I'll also say we really made this decision just last week to move back or to adjust this a month. And so we have a couple of weeks right now, and you'll see it clearly on the timeline when we get there, a couple of weeks to kind of flesh out these things and make sure that with this couple week delay that where we're thinking still makes sense. And so, okay, so one of the policy recommendations, ideas that came up in the fall of last year was a policy to identify underrepresented council districts. And this is really about a way of broadening access to those with limited or no access in the past. And this was not adopted at the time due to the number of different competing or overlapping time-sensitive needs, and wanting to make sure that we have a fully fleshed out policy with clear objectives and sort of a proposal that will help us meet those objectives. And so this was not implemented at the time last year, and we right now are not bringing a recommendation for that right now, and we've really been beginning to have these conversations around, what data points would define underrepresented council districts. Is it Metro Arts data, i.e. Thrive grant dollars, operating dollars, public art dollars? Is it Metro data about Metro resources more broadly? Is it a community level indicator that we get from an outside data source? So is it about, income in a certain area? Is it about a different data source in an area? We are having some of those conversations, both internally as well as through the community conversations that we're having. But right now, we are not bringing a recommendation for you on that. But of course, we want to have discussion about that. And so that's the first, that is the first recommendation or lack thereof that we are bringing. So currently, right now, we have no action for this cycle on this point.
I have a question. As we think about further research and policy development being needed, is there a plan, a timeline? Are there other entities that we're talking about working with to go ahead and do that so that, again, just to repeat, we're not kicking the can down and we're still at the end of fiscal year 26 saying the same thing? So if we have had some of those conversations, is there any update around potential dates, potential partners, et cetera?
Yeah, I think that we could, at a future meeting date, bring what some of those data are, because we don't have that data compiled right now. If you were to, we have it because it exists, right? But because of the overlapping tasks that we've moved through in the last several weeks and couple of months, this has stayed on our mind, but not top of the list. And so I know when I'm thinking about a policy, I want to make sure that I understand what the data are that are informing it, want to be able to show some of those things to you all so that we can have a robust and informed conversation. Go ahead.
So maybe we could, and next meeting we're voting, right? So maybe the next meeting, devote a significant portion of the agenda towards looking at the data that we have, seeing what additional data we might want. Maybe there are, as you said, other partners or other people who we could invite to kind of weigh in. So kind of making that the major part of the agenda. And then we could maybe decide on a timeline at that meeting and if we need further research. I also have a student who, my class did a cultural infrastructure map, and I have a student who's working this summer on an independent study and students who want to work on some of these mapping things. So I offer that as well as another layer of kind of just looking at what exists and what we might want.
Okay, so two things. One, I wasn't asking for the actual data. I was asking, is there a timeline by which we do the things that you're talking about? And so if there is then a timeline by which that happens, I'm asking for that. So not even to necessarily asking that we do that work in the next meeting, because I think there's some other work that we will be doing in the next meeting. So not that. I'm asking, is there the timeline? Have we thought about who else needs to be involved in the conversation from Metro, from the council, the Apple Committee, and things of that nature? Not that we already have that in hand, but that we actually have the plan or putting together the plan that we can then calendar, that we can then benchmark and mark ourselves around the work. That's all I'm asking.
Would it be maybe helpful for us to put together a tentative timeline for this with some ideas that we could bring to the next committee meeting to discuss? And so that way, because I think we would have time for that, right, next meeting, even though we're voting. So we could create just what you're saying, like kind of a timeline and thinking about other people in Metro, the data that exists, all of that, and a timeline for how this might roll out. That makes sense to me too. Any other thoughts about that? I can work on that timeline I can collaborate with you all to bring that for discussion. Okay, perfect.
Great, thank you. All right, if you go to the next slide, this one is about our background check requirement. And so, of course, our policy objective here is ensuring that grantees working directly with youth in their organization or in their programmatic work have satisfactory background check clearance. And so this is on here because the thing that we know from working with grantees is that there was some frustration through the process about unclear process or implementation. And so we are suggesting a couple of improvements to that. And so adding this to the operating guidelines where we did collect this information from all operating grantees, although it was not in the guidelines. So just formalizing that in the guidelines. Adjusting that the background checks be completed within the last 2 years is what it currently says, but adjusting that to 5 years, which we heard resoundingly is the sort of industry best practice about that. Updating the language, and I should also say these are our preliminary ideas, so they have not gone through legal review yet, and I think I meant to say that at the beginning, but confirming or verifying if adjusting the language is okay to say if awarded, this would be required, especially if background checks would be required on several individuals. We know that this is a cost to applicants, and so requiring that if awarded so that people don't have to incur that cost without knowing if they are having a grant coming in. And so we would update the attestation form to reflect these changes. And so we would keep the attestation form as it is, which means that Metro Arts is not the one handling potentially sensitive information, but the applicant is attesting that they meet the requirements that we have. And so these changes are really just improving the process that we have.
Questions or additional comments on this? Okay. As with all of this, if you get home and you think, oh, please send it right to us as well, if your thought comes later. I guess we can move on then to the curing period.
The next recommendation that we're bringing is something new. And so we're calling this a curing period. We could call it something else if we want to call it something else, but essentially a short window after technical reviews where applicants have an opportunity to cure or to fix potential things that would disqualify their application from moving to the community review panel. And so the objective here is to really prevent technical denials that might be based on confusion or a technical glitch, or maybe the wrong form was updated somewhere on the application. So these are things that could be easily cured, that staff review all of that in technical reviews, and then there's a 3-day period where everybody who gets flagged for a denial has that short window to fix their application. So this is really about providing support. It's something that we came up with to be responsive to the problems that were brought up during the appeals, or just other things that we've heard through conversations with our grantees or with our applicants this year. Of course, not everything would be able to be fixed or cured. So that's not the intent of this, right? If an application says, I'm gonna build a apartment building, I'm just making something up, right? That's not something that could be cured or fixed through this, but these are for preventable denials. So it's really about access and support. And so that is the recommendation there. Any questions, thoughts?
Do you have a sense of how many, just as an example, it might have affected in this past cycle? It may be hard to know, but
I'll say in regards to true technical denials, I would say that this is actually going to be kind of a little bit of a hard one to answer because some of them were denied because they either you can just tell that the application was abandoned or that it was not completed, or maybe if they decided to go with an operating over a Thrive because we had the requirement. So in terms of, it's cloudy, but I would say they were close to about 20% of the technicals denials were due to what we are now calling most likely curable technical review period, that if we would have had this, we might have been able to have maybe roughly 20% be submitted in full. But I will say just a reminder that when we're looking at this, and we kind of went back about how do we determine what is something that could be corrected. We're talking about dead links, or if we have the ability to, for our application, you can either do an audio, a video, or a written narrative application. So let's say like we go through to do your technical and we find that the video isn't playing. That is something that we would do, and that's something that we are considering within this curing period to say, hey, your application is essentially not loading for us. Can you try to, can you try to correct this in the 3-day period? So anything that we are hopefully putting on this curing period will not be anything that has to do with the narrative or the written or the responses to the application, and only those of making sure that the application is open and accessible to either staff and or potential panelists. So we would not be looking at anything that is in relation to a scoring part of this application. So I think that's super important to state here, and that's kind of what that last sentence is at the very end, is if the reasons can be corrected. So that is something that we're going to tighten up as we have a conversation about what is exactly something that can be cured and what's something that can't be. So it's very clear once we get past the technical review stage is understood amongst all parties.
So what I'm hearing there too is like maybe there's even just like in the communication like a bullet point list of things that can be cured and things that can't, or something, so that it's very clear what you're saying. Yeah, like what this is meant to kind of quote unquote solve or help with, and what it's not. And I think that would be great. I'm curious about the 3 days. I don't know. Why 3, do you think?
Why 3 became, so on the timeline, we've kind of allocated a 2-week period for technical reviews. 1 week is for staff. I'm just going to say Monday through Friday for ease of days. So staff is really doing that tech reviews Monday through Friday. End of day on Friday, we'll know who needs that communication. And so if we can get that communication out Monday through Wednesday, full days, the applicants can cure. We can have whatever conversations, one-on-ones, making sure we have process to do that. And then that'll give us Thursday, Friday. Maybe we only have 10 that might come back with things cured, but that gives us the last 2 days of a 2-week tech review period. So, yeah.
That was my question, but in addition to that, do you think we should add language around business days or days in general just to avoid misunderstandings?
And potentially, because that was my question, is because as it reads here, is 3-day post-deadline window, post-deadline, and so is that post-deadline for when you turn the grant in? And then it was clarified that it was after technical review, but I think we probably need to make sure that that's in the language.
Yeah, we would absolutely have a formalized start and end date for when the curing period, because, I mean, as we're building this timeline out, we know that it's going to take us some time to get through however X number of applications that we receive. And so we're not saying, I'm making this date a December 1st is the end day of the applications being closed. We're not saying that it's going to start directly after that. You'll definitely, in our conversations, will be notified, and then you'll have an opportunity to correct it. And then by the end point, if it's not cured at that point, then the technical denial at that point will continue. So.
I think it could, to your point, to be something that we can communicate, and even people can put it on their calendars even, right? That it's like these 3 days, this is the window, right? And in our kind of community engagement, we can like make sure people know that.
Yeah, so, what we do after this is we've got to incorporate ideas into guidelines, give the guidelines to legal for review. Legal does their review, and then it comes back to you. And so that's just what we're looking at after the meeting today. So thank you for suggestions. Anything else on this point? Okay. What do we got on the next slide? So the next slide is also about providing more support for our applicants. So this is thinking about first-time applicant support. And so we know that one of our objectives is to increase, access and opportunity to those who have had limited or none in the past. And so we are proposing a few new ways to do that with this cycle. And so, yes. So what we're proposing is to add a couple questions to the application. So this will also help us with our data collection and identifying first-time applicants or applicants that have never received funding before. And so this would be, adding a question like, for Thrive, have you or the lead artist, if that's a different person, previously received a grant from Metro Arts, a Thrive grant, any time in the past, yes or no? And for operating, it would be adding a question of if the organization has previously received an operating support grant in the past. So that'd be the first new question. And then there could be another unscored question added to the application. Just as a first-time applicant, is there anything else that you want to include that maybe you weren't provided through the questions? So that is first recommendation on this theme. Second recommendation idea that we have is for these first-time applicants or applicants who have never received funding before to have an opportunity to be present at the review panels and to just state, their first 2 minutes, they get to address the panel. It's not for a back and forth Q&A, but it's just to be present and to give that opportunity for, increased access to these that we have identified previously, and just to observe the panel, and that's all they would be present for. And then the last recommendation here is just priority access to office hours. That could be something as simple as the first week is just available to people who have not been funded before or are first-time applicants. So just making sure that that support is added on the front end instead of, the day before the deadline, and the proactive work that we would do to identify folks and make those connections. So a few different things in there, but these are the ideas that we are bringing for providing additional support this cycle.
Do grant clinics need to be included in this language, or are those just going to happen as part of the process, or?
The grant clinics are the office hours. Yeah, they're kind of used interchangeably. So office hours or grant clinics, the 101s essentially, where our calendars are open for people to schedule with us. That's that language right there.
Do you think it might be helpful to add for first-time applicants grant clinics that are outside of operating like business hours?
Yeah, we can absolutely, I don't see why we couldn't consider something like that. I know when we were having conversations about community engagement, as we're moving forward into this, making sure that we're, one, demographically in different places, and then time-wise that we're looking at different ways to get that feedback and to just meet people kind of where they are. And I wanted to add to the opportunity to address the review panel. It's an idea, and it's one that we've kind of gone trying to shape it. And so we looked at even just allowing them to upload maybe a video so that way they don't physically have to be at the panels, or if they're able to join virtually, just so that they can, just almost like an introduction, introduce themselves. Because remember, this isn't just for individuals who have never applied, it's also for the individuals who've never been awarded. So they might have applied before, and maybe they've gotten to the panel, and for whatever reason they weren't awarded or scored, maybe because of a technical situation. So just as a way to kind of formally introduce themselves, so that at least they feel supported in the process, especially if they've applied before and not been awarded, and not just if this is their first time experiencing a Metro Arts panel, or a Metro Arts process.
Would that be true for, let's say someone is taking over an arts organization or taking over a project, but they are new to the process? Would it be for them or no?
I'm going to go on a limb here, because this is not something that we've necessarily talked about, but personally, I would say that that's not the case, because we fund organizations, and so at that point, the organization would have been funded before. And in the case of Thrive, I don't know if that necessarily works the same way, because it's the individual, or it's the project, or maybe it's an organization that doesn't hold nonprofit status. So in that case, we would have essentially awarded the entity already. So I hope I'm safe to say.
I like providing multiple ways for people to provide comment or address, just virtually, in person, on video, different ways. I think that's good and accessible.
Okay. Great. All right. Our next one. Okay, so this is about the internal, our commission appeal process that we have. And so we are coming with I'll start with the recommendation and then how we backed into that. So we're coming with a recommendation to remove the appeals process and replace it with an option to meet with Metro Arts staff to understand the reason for denial and to discuss areas for improvement. I have been told that this is how Metro Arts used to do it at some point in the past. I believe that we haven't seen appeals in the way that we've did it this year in recent years. But bigger than that, or broader than that, this just really, what I'm calling it, aligns with the standard legal appeal process for boards and commissions. And what I mean by that is that if an individual is dissatisfied with the outcome of a vote that this body makes, they're instructed via the statement that we read at the beginning of our meetings about potential options that they can take, and our legal procedure manual that you all have and that we have as our staff guide really doesn't contemplate what I'm calling this internal appeals process. Internal is my word. That's just the word I'm using to describe it. And so by doing this, it just moves us into alignment with this more standard practice for boards and commissions, while also sort of reducing allocation uncertainty on our end. By that, I mean, we spend out all of the dollars that we have available to us. And so in the event of a successful appeal or a different decision, I should call it that, I don't have really a reserve budget line for that. And so it reduces uncertainty around that. And I also just noted that this curing period that we just talked about, if implemented, would reduce the chance for avoidable denials, and hopefully these support structures that we're putting in place will just avoid potential appeals coming up. I know that's that. So that is the recommendation that we're coming with, and happy to talk about that more and answer questions.
So just to clarify, this, as far as we can tell, reinstates the previous policy that was in place before. I mean, this is something that the commission has done before, we think.
I can't
This is where our institutional
point
memory.
you exactly to, at this year, it was done this way. But
Right.
just in talking to previously serving commissioners,
Yeah.
it was noted to me that this is a new process that we've done. And previously, when somebody had been denied, it's typically, you have an opportunity to come in and to look at all the feedback from your review panels and really just have a conversation about what went wrong, how did it go wrong, how can you improve next time?
And then the statement that you were referring to is the one that I read first, in terms of that's kind of the standard statement for boards and commissions. And so this would be, after that meeting, if someone wanted to continue the process, this would be the procedure that's already in place.
If there are no concerns about that, we will likely, move forward with the suggestion as we have recommended it here. But we wanted to be transparent about why we are suggesting that.
It seems really smart to me because often something that is discussed and explained one-on-one makes more sense than someone listening to a whole board of people talk about things, and then also discussing things one-on-one outside of the realm of a public meeting might be more appropriate anyway.
Great. Okay. I rearranged the slides a little bit out of order on there. So what we have just gone over is kind of across the board, both operating and Thrive relevant. And now we've got Thrive specific ones, and operating specific, and then one at the end. So this slide here, we have 3 Thrive potential changes or things that we are thinking about to bring to you all. We'll go through them one by one, but they are about the maximum request amount in this year's application, the Thrive Public Art category, and how we think about and implement fiscal sponsor administrative fees. So we'll take them up one by one. The next slide is about the maximum request amount. And so we have thought long and deliberated and debated about this and talked with various folks in these community conversations. And so the objective here is to have a maximum request amount that does not change through the cycles, just because we know that caused some confusion and frustration in the cycle. So just explicitly stating that, which we all know. But when we think about the policy that this body authorized in January, it was to fund awards at 75% of the maximum request, which at the time was $20,000. i.e. that 75% was $15,000 was the policy decision, roughly, that this body, that we made and implemented in this past cycle. Our recommendation, and what we're bringing to really just have this discussion right now, is to think about $15,000 being the maximum request for this cycle. This is a reduction from the last cycle of the maximum request amount being $20,000. But as we move through the slides, we're really trying to think holistically about the best way to allocate funds, thinking about the Thrive amounts, thinking about award amounts to our organizations as well, and really trying to think about how to best meet our policy goals and objectives. And so we are bringing for discussion the recommendation for, $15,000 maximum request. Gonna look at that's all I have in my notes. And so, yes, this is larger than it has been in the majority of Thrive, and it is smaller than it has been in the last 2 years. When it was increased to the $20,000, that was when we had the larger grant budget that we don't have access to right now. And so this is what we feel like is in alignment with the decision that was made that we implemented this year. And so that's what we're recommending for this cycle as well.
And to be clear, the organizations could apply for $20,000 last year, but as you said, the commission approved the 75%, which is $15,000. Depending on what we decide this year, it could be fully funded at $15,000. So we could end up kind of with the same maximum award as last year. Is that correct?
So, this is again because we have unknowns until we open applications, right? We don't know how many applications will come in, right? We feel like this is why, or this is one of the reasons why I think the funding formula landed where it did in the last cycle. And so we see this as a way of maintaining consistency across the cycles here. And to your point, Commissioner, I don't anticipate bringing recommendations of let's fund just at 50% or let's fund at 75%. We did that because of the circumstances that we were in with some of the things we were trying to work through earlier in the year. But this would be the amount that you are applying for, and you will find out if you are funded, yes or no, right? Okay. All right, the next category, I will say that we have had lots of full team discussions about this one. This has been a topic of the last 2 cycles that has come up, and so I'm happy to give background information if needed, if helpful. But what we need to do right now is very clearly define or clearly answer for ourselves if public art projects will be included in Thrive. And what I mean by that is the application that has been the application of the last 2 years has really distinguished between 2 different types of Thrive categories. One is community art projects, one is community public art projects, i.e. murals, sculptures, architectural landscape, a few other examples. In the last 2 cycles, FY24 and FY25, the way I've listed it here on the slides is that the project requirements and best practices and process was not fully developed, which is why we've had some of the challenges that we've had of the last couple of years. And so a conversation that has been happening in the Public Art Committee about 2 years ago, and then because of the challenges of the last 2 years, hasn't really had the capacity, ability, and leadership to push it forward, is what would it take, what would a mural project at Metro Arts look like? And so we are without a public art manager right now. And of course, we've had a number of executive directors in the last year, and having some of those, that has certainly hindered the ability to really flesh this out a little more. And that's why I say if more background in history is helpful in this conversation, I'm happy to explain that to the best of my understanding of it. But essentially, we believe through conversations with our colleagues, especially those on the public art team, in addition to ourselves here in grants, that Thrive doesn't, in the way that we have been running it the last 2 years, really adequately support public art projects. There are different requirements when it comes to public art that aren't typical in Thrive projects, and we've seen some of those things that have come up. You know, in a public art project, when it's being evaluated, you have to typically submit a lot more information that does not typically go through the Thrive process that we've had. That might include maintenance plans, that might include property agreements between different partners that are part of the project that is being proposed. We have had some projects come back to us just recently right now asking about some of those things, about availability of maintenance funds, for example. And those things were not contemplated in the Thrive guidelines that propose these projects that I know I want to support. I assume many of you want to support. This was a thing that came up and was one of the longest, hardest things to resolve through conciliation, right? This recommendation does not come because we want to not support murals, but it is because we haven't been adequately providing the support that we should for these projects in the last couple of years. And just to give you a size or a scope, we had 2 mural projects this year, and so that's just like the kind of the number that we are thinking about of how many are actually in our pool of grantees this year. Yeah, I'm just looking at my notes to make sure that I hit the points that I want to make, because like I said, some of these conversations, or this conversation did happen where the Public Art Committee discussed and made, a commitment to figuring out how we do a mural public art program at Metro Arts. But because of the things that I have already said, we have not been able to develop that out. And so we do hope to hire a public art manager by early fall that will be able to, we hope and expect, provide some of the leadership that is needed to really think about this and flesh this out. And so, yeah, in summary, this really involves a lot of considerations about public art that have not kind of been fleshed out in this space. And so that is why we are bringing this recommendation here. Happy to answer questions to the best of my ability, the best of our ability as we understand them. But yeah, go ahead.
I think I have 2 questions just to try to understand the conversation. What makes this may be a really naive question, but what is the definition of public art? Like, what does that mean? And how is a mural different from, say, an outdoor play? And then when you say you haven't provided enough support for that type of public art for murals specifically, do you mean financial support, or what exactly do you mean by that?
So one thing might be about the duration of the life of a project, right? And so I am not an expert in this, but, is something categorized as temporary art or permanent art? 10 years is a number that often gets used, but often to have the longevity of that, it requires a maintenance fund. It requires plans in place for damage that might happen because of something lives outside. And so that's the type of thing that I mean.
Yeah, that's helpful. And so never mind, that answered both questions at once, thank you.
And so just also to kind of restate or reiterate, just to make sure, I mean, there have been discussions about like having a dedicated line, right, in the budget for public art projects that would be funded differently from Thrive because of that level of support. That has not happened because of a lot of the things you were discussing in terms of the last couple of years, the ups and downs. And so the question is, like, Thrive, this may not be the appropriate place, right, for these projects to live because of both of the definition and the commitment to longevity and maintenance, and supporting artists the way they need to be supported. So in the interim, we're talking about removing those public art projects from Thrive with the hopes that in the fall we can start, right, with the Public Art Committee and trying to work on what, like, a dedicated program might look like. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'll say I think that we could, in the fall, start with some education in this body from our public art colleagues and experts around some of those things. I don't want to make a commitment for a person who is not here yet, the public art manager, because we don't know who that person is going to be. That's one of our key vacancies. And so this is also a capacity thing because it's the policy, are we going to include it, yes or no? But then it's also the process. And so ideally, or as it was done at some points in the past, if a public art Thrive project is approved in this body, it then goes to PAC for approval. And there's another layer of approval. We haven't done that in the last couple of years because of the anomalies of the cycles, but that has been, and that, you know, it's okay that we didn't do that, but that has been brought to our attention of, that's where some of those conversations would have happened with those experts, both staff and committee members. And so when we're getting some of these questions on the back end, it's because we didn't have those considerations on the front end.
Okay, I have a couple of questions. So if, to your point, Heather, Commissioner Lefkowitz, we're hoping to eventually have a line item for public art. Not in our budget that we just submitted, right? So if we're removing the public art category from these projects now, that is simply temporary for this coming year in the preparation for the person coming in the fall. But the intent is then for fiscal year 27 to potentially add murals and other forms of public art back in that fiscal year, potentially, depending on the work that happens and the community engagement, talking with mural artists around what that looks like and things of that nature.
I think that is right. And I think there's consensus that that's what everyone wants, too, that we want murals, we want public art, we want it to be supported. And as you said, I guess it kind of depends on who's the public art manager, but as a commission, I think we can
add that to a job description. I mean, because if we're hiring an employee of the Arts Commission, then, and if our expectation is not that we're just removing the public art category and we're not ever, and we really do want to do murals again, then yes, we hire the person, but we let the person know that this is important to the commission and that it is something that we intend to do, and we intend to do it in 27 while we're temporarily removing it in 26, so that there is no ambiguous language around public art staff person, come in and let's hear what it is you want to do. We want you to do this, and we want to hear what you want to do.
Yeah, I think that is the way to make sure that the things that we say our priorities are become our priorities. And I've been going through old emails. I mean, I've got a list of questions right here that I'm happy to share out of some of those questions that were being asked 2 years ago when this conversation was really happening then, before the other things happened. And so, yeah.
One more point. As we're talking about a public art staff person's job description, then we also need to talk about an executive director's description that says, these are the things that we are committed to. And as executive director, our expectation and intent is that you then also carry that out.
So, given that a high number of the people that helped us come to a conciliation agreement ultimately were mural artists, and did I hear right that we actually did fund 2 Thrive programs, or 2 Thrive projects that were murals, even though they aren't properly supported the way murals usually would be? Did I hear that correctly? There were 2 of them.
We funded 2 that
Yeah.
meet the criteria for the guidelines that we published this year.
Absolutely, yeah. I'm just wondering, is it going to would it cause a severe amount of pain in the grant process moving forward if we were to just wait on this until we had conversations about a grant, about a program specifically for murals, and then eliminated this out of the guidelines? So, because there would be no money at all coming from Metro Arts for any sort of mural at all, even if it's not appropriately supported over the course of time. I guess that's my question. Should we consider waiting to remove it until we actually have something to replace it?
That is a thing that I have also asked a lot as well. I mean, I think that we could bring, there's 2 ways forward here right now. It is, we go back and we have more conversations with the public art team, because it's really about process as well, right? And so, was the process for a public art project after it's approved by this committee, that's going to go to the PAC committee, which on the timeline would be the September PAC committee meeting. So we could flesh that out a little bit more and come back at the next meeting with this, and we would still probably know what our recommendation would be, right? But we would have more information about what it would take to keep it included.
One factor too is we did have 2 this year, but we don't know how many we would have potentially this year, and that might be a consideration as well, just in terms of labor. But I do think it might be helpful to think about what, as you're saying, like what that might look like, at least in terms of if it were left in and going to public art, and with the sensitivity that in terms of capacity, right?
I guess my only concern, there's a pretty clear definition of what public art is and how the funding from that comes from the percent fund, and that's not murals at all whatsoever. And then we have Thrive, where we did actually, even though it was not well supported, we did pay out 2 grants to people who did murals, understanding that it wasn't supported the way they would have wanted to. And if we turn it off now, there's at least for one grant cycle, no money for murals at all. And that seems like it, to some degree, flies in the face of the whole process we went through the last couple of years, where the majority of the people that came to us were muralists. So.
Yeah, I don't disagree with what you said. I mean, I think a difference is right now is that we had pending applications when this conversation was being had a little bit in the fall of last year. And so, you know what my opinion has been on this in the last 2 years. That's been quite public. And so we're happy to bring another update maybe to our next meeting with kind of more clearly defined 2 paths forward, 2 sets of guidelines. At the end of that meeting, we will approve one that either has it in the process in place or the guidelines that does not have it in place. If we want to just kind of put a pin in this and come back next month. I think Tessa has something to say.
Yeah, and I was trying to raise my hand before Commissioner Jester spoke. No, you're fine. You hit the nail on the head, Commissioner Jester, that per the Metro Code, public art is very clearly defined, and the public art guidelines are followed for all public art projects. And the term public art project is clearly defined as well in the Metro Code. So when we're thinking about funding a project that is considered public art, it's not coming from the percent fund. And per the code, that is public art. So my legal recommendation would be, it can't be called public art because it doesn't meet the definition of the code. And I'm happy to answer any questions about that. I do know the intent was honestly what we were seeing from this cycle. Those two murals were proposed to be put on Metro Parks property. And so Metro Parks has asked for Arts' recommendation and the normal process you see in public art. And, that idea was not fleshed out as Ashley has said. And so those projects have now been delayed because maintenance plans were not thought about and things of that nature that you see with normal public art projects.
So even the two that we approved are held up because of technical reasons. Yeah.
Essentially, yeah. I mean, it's great that I also work with Parks, so I can help them work through that since I'm Arts' attorney as well. But yes, there's additional considerations, right? And then those projects that were funded by Thrive are going to other Metro departments as grants, essentially. So just to think through the courses of action.
I guess I would say too, if we bring something else back, if we do, maybe we could have someone from public art, a staff member here as well to help us if we need it. Commissioner Wade, I know you have to go. She's got to go. Can I say? You're going to go. She's going to go drive the van. So thank you. And I'll send you then for the recording and information. Thank you, Commissioner Wade. The ask is to, we're going to weigh this, and then the ask is that we also next time can see potentially what it might look like in terms of the calendar and coming to public art, what it might look like if we were to keep it in, with the caveat of what Tessa's talking about in terms of legal things. So is that correct, Commissioner Jester?
Yeah, I think so. I see the rationale for removing it. It just, perception is reality, and the perception is going to be that we're not funding mural artists, which would be very real if we were to remove it. And we just extricated ourselves, or are still in the process of extricating ourselves from a rather gargantuan PR fiasco. So I just don't want to see that happen again. And yeah.
I mean, we've definitely we've considered all of these angles. And so I know that when we were first talking about it, we went back to even before I was here, we were looking at some of the guidelines in terms of like what was the lifespan of a Thrive project, and does that work into what we consider temporary and permanent public art outside of just its own definition. So, I mean, these are all things that we're taking into consideration, and I do think it needs to, we were working with applications that we already had in terms of 25, and so now we're trying to prepare for essentially an unknown factor of what we might potentially interact with 26. So all things to be considered.
I do want to say one more thing, just because words are important. I very much realize that we were not in just a PR fiasco over the last couple of years. The PR fiasco was a result of some real issues that needed addressing. So I didn't mean to glaze over that by just calling it a PR issue.
Does this clarify, or are you worried, Tessa?
No, I mean, I think historically, Director Singh was very clear on the reason for needing a mural project because of these second and third order effects that come from murals. And I'll defer to Director Batchelder, but there's not the funding, at least for my know, for Metro Arts to fund these projects on the front end and then do the necessary maintenance and upkeep. And so I did agree with his rationale when he brought the mural project forward a couple years ago, just because from a legal standpoint, we cannot blur public art under the code with these additional programs.
Not to complicate things further, but does this mean we should be creating a third grant category? That's
I mean, that's kind of been where we're hoping that will lead to, but just with the timeline that we have now with 26 is why we've made the recommendation that we have, because we want to make sure that we're doing justice, and to use the same words, that we're supporting them in a way that is actually conducive to the project that they're trying to complete. I mean, just from our preliminary research and just the conversations that we've had, even when our Thrive Awards were at their largest, for murals, realistically, that award is not doing full murals in most cases. That's also with other supportive measures to financially support those projects. And so we want to make sure that we're considering that, that if we change our max awards for Thrive, I mean, it could definitely change the amount of murals that we're having, because that's primarily the funding that they're receiving from Metro Arts. So all things to be considered when it comes. And it's not just murals, remember everyone, it's murals, it's architectural designs, it's landscaping. So while we used kind of murals as like an umbrella term, it's a multitude of different
long-term projects.
Absolutely.
And that's what I said in the beginning, kind of about like an additional budget line, right?
Gotcha.
Which would imply like, as you say, like another kind of program, which is just a whole other kind of thing to be considered, to your point about like new staff. And so, okay.
So we will bring more information for our next.
Well, I think, just bringing more information, but this is helpful to see the constraints in which we are. And just to be transparent, I think about our discussion, which I think is helpful.
Okay, this is the last of the 3 Thrive potential changes. So this is about fiscal sponsor fees. And so our objective here is to determine the method for fiscal sponsor administrative fees that meets our program, artist, and fiscal sponsor needs. And so currently, what is in the guidelines is that if using a fiscal sponsor, that said fiscal sponsor may charge up to 10% to be decided between the artist and the fiscal sponsor. We've heard feedback on both sides of that relationship, that people felt a bit unsupported, or that this kind of negotiate or come to an agreement between the two of you felt inequitable, felt unsupported by Metro Arts. And so we're trying to think of what does a better process look like. And I can share more feedback about that if you want me to elaborate there. But what we want to do is explore. I've got that word up here because we're exploring this right now. If a standard flat fiscal sponsor fee that's added on top of the award is a more equitable and more fair method for doing this. And so in that sense, it would be, say somebody has a $15,000 Thrive grant, there is a standard built-in administrative fee. If using a fiscal sponsor, that could be, the examples I put here, $600, $750. So that would be written in to be more clear, defined. I'm not bringing a number recommendation right now, and that's why I say we're exploring this, because we want to have conversations with organizations that are serving as a fiscal sponsor. And so this is just kind of the other approach that we've come up with for this area of fiscal sponsorship.
Could an organization in this model still elect not to receive the fee? They could still refuse if they wanted to.
That's a note that I wrote for myself to assess as well. I mean, we can't compel anybody to accept money from us, so I would imagine that we could. And so, yeah, because, there's no free money, right? So this would come from somewhere. So, but the award would be, with this example of $15,000 to the artist, 600, whatever that amount would be to the fiscal sponsor. So it wouldn't be coming out of that artist budget as proposed as well.
I think that's also a fair point, and like looking back at the feedback from the community engagement and thinking about like the negotiation of this. People are in different spaces in terms of thinking about how you negotiate a fee like this. Artists are in different kind of places, and I think to provide some consistency as a commission and just say this is kind of what it is might be helpful, right? In terms of removing that negotiation piece between the artist and the organization. Now, you could make another argument, right, about it, but I think what you're saying is consistent with like some of the feedback I read and what you provided from the community engagement sessions.
Yeah, it seems to me like the part that would have been considered inequitable would have been the negotiation between 0 and 10%. But I like the idea of a volunteer fiscal agent. I guess we'll see how many volunteer again next year. But the idea that it's a flat amount and then the fiscal agent could turn down the flat amount or accept the flat amount, and either the artist would just hand over the flat amount or keep the flat amount as part of their grant, and that just be the only option. So there was no negotiation. It's just the fiscal agent gets paid or the fiscal agent doesn't get paid, or the money stays in the artist's budget, I think would be.
I just want to clarify, as we are exploring, it would not be part of the artist grant because it would be on top of. So that way the fee's not coming out of the requested amount that you requested. So nobody is being granted more than they requested, and the organization is being supported by Metro Arts via this fee. Somebody compared this to, so one of our organizations that is thought about being a fiscal sponsor and decided not to, but is a host site for our internship program, where built into the financial support is an administrative fee. That is a set amount. And so they made that comparison. Why don't you do it like you do in the other program? Yeah. So we will further explore this and bring it back in a way that would be acceptable and makes sense. So I'm going to keep moving us along because I'm looking at the time. So, all right, so we've got a couple operating support changes. One is much more simple than the other. So if we go to the next slide, this is the simple one. This is really just adding some language around the definition of an arts organization. And so it's not really changing it, it's just adding more words and examples to it. And so organizations must have a primary mission in the arts, and the majority of programming must support the performance, exhibition, instruction, creation, or education in the arts. We also talked about how we would sort of operationalize this on the application, is that there could be like check mark or check boxes where you're provided options of like what category of art are you in. That also helps us with our data collection and also collecting the organization's mission on the application. And so this is really just adding clarifying language there. And this has come because a couple of organizations have come to us and said, am I an arts organization? What do I qualify for operating? And so we just want to be able to be better equipped to answer this question. All right, I'm going to move us on to operating funding formulas. And so our objective here is to make improvements to the current funding formula for operating. So I've got a few slides here that walk through 3 different ways that we could approach this. So the first one is to maintain our current budget ranges, award sizes, and the method that we use for this year, which I'm calling a uniform scale. I'm about to show you an image that you've seen before, and you'll know what I mean when I say uniform scale. So we could keep the current method that we have right now. Nothing really changes to the method, or we could maintain the ranges, the budget ranges and award sizes, but allocate specific percentages of operating funding by category size. You'll see what I mean when we get there. Or we could change the budget ranges and or award size calculations, which would be the most transformative change for the funding formula. So these slides look so different in this filter that is on here. You've seen this slide before. It's been green when I've showed it in other images, but this is our current funding formula for operating. As you know, micro through large organizations, we determine what does it mean to fully fund these organizations based on the funding formula shown in the second column there, and then we scale it to the budget that is available. This is what I mean when I say a uniform scale. So our math at the bottom of the slide shows that our uniform scale is 33%. This is how we calculate everybody's operating award this year. We could keep this and not make any changes. That's the simplest path forward. If you go to the next slide, this is one potential change to it. So this is what I'm calling maintaining our current ranges in size, but allocating a % of the operating budget by category. So I have some language here that could be an example of what that would look like in the guidelines. Applicants do not apply for a specific award amount. Rather, they are eligible for an award based on budget size. That is currently as it is. The actual award amount will be scaled to the available budget. What is new about this one is that we go on to say, of the overall operating support budget, X% will be allocated to large organizations, X% to midsize, X% to medium, X to small, X to micro. And so together, this base percentage and those allocations will determine the award sizes. So the next slide will show you with a visual of what I mean by that. If you go to the next slide. So you've seen these numbers. I've shown them before in previous meetings that we've had here. But of our total operating budget, which is that $1,957,000, we allocated 23.9% of that budget to large organizations, 38.5% to midsize, 25% to medium, 9% to small, 2% to micro. So that is just using the uniform scale where every award was scaled to about 33% of the full funding. That's how the distribution, the allocation comes out. If you go to the next slide, this is what I mean where we could assign a specific % allocation based on what we are trying to accomplish. So instead of using a uniform scale, we could, being informed by what we did this year, we could think about what are our objectives as a commission, and we could assign allocations based on that. This is hypothetical, but I'm going to move through this hypothetical example. Say we're going to allocate 20% of our operating budget to large organizations, 35% to midsize, 28% to medium organizations, 12% to small, 5% to micro. You can see how that compares to our distribution this year. So large organizations slightly lower, midsize slightly lower, and then medium, small, and micro slightly higher allocations of our total available dollars. If you go to the next slide, this is where we do the math to develop a scale that is no longer a uniform scale. So grant size, large through micro, that allocation, hypothetical allocation that I just went through, shows how much money that is to distribute to organizations in those size, and that gives us a scale. So in the current example of what we did this year, we scaled every award to 33% of their full funding. When we play this formula out, you see that large organizations would be scaled to about 28% of their full funding request, and you see the scale increases as we go down, where our micro organizations would be scaled to about 68% of their full funding request. And so this method with these hypothetical numbers are how we could determine, based on our goals and objectives, a little better way to allocate some of those funds. If we go to the next slide, these colors look different on. They look different than they do on that screen here. So this is a color-coded image that the colors didn't come out here, but I will describe it verbally. And so what I have done is I just hypothetically ran these numbers with two different examples in every size organization. And so the categories that you see here are large through micro organizations. You see the revenue, so I have tried to select different size organizations, again, 2 within each example. Calculated the full funding amount, so this is in a world where the arts are fully funded. And then I showed our FY25 award. And so those are the awards that we have distributed right now. You've seen these numbers before. You've approved these grant sizes. And then you see the new situations of how this funding formula would math out, how the math would come out. So instead of having a uniform scale like we did for this year, the hypothetical scales are there as shown. That was what I just showed in the previous slide. And then the adjusted award amount based on applying those scales. And so you see here in this example, our large and mid-sized organizations, those top 4 rows are a slightly different color than the 6 rows at the bottom, because in this adjustment, the awards would be slightly lower than they were in the current FY25 awards. And the 6 rows at the bottom for our micro through medium organizations are slightly higher than they were for these awards. And so the variable that's the most informative here is the hypothetical scale. Our uniform scale this year is 33%. And so if the scale in this scenario is lower than 33%, the awards are slightly lower. If it is higher than 33%, the awards are slightly higher. And so, go to the next slide. I think this might be, okay, go back. Okay, so this is the last kind of how this plays out, but go back one more. So this is the main thing to think about. In this funding formula, our ability here is to direct the allocation based on size here. Does the difference here make sense? I'm gonna look here instead of keeping my back here. This is one way to do it. And I will say, we know that award sizes are smaller at every level of the operating spectrum here, right? They're smaller from micro through large organizations. For a few reasons, right? Our budget has not grown. We have allocated more to Thrive, which I know is what this policy or what this body and we, that has been our priority, right? But so the operating budget has reduced. Organization grants across the board have reduced. And it's really a question of some of those small awards have become quite small. Mm-hmm. And so this is a way that helps address that in one way, right? This is why we've seen organizations asking the question, well, should I be applying for Thrive? Because now my small operating grant is quite so small, right? And is added to some, where do we best fit in? And so this is one way to address that where we can show I'm just repeating myself at this point. And so questions, thoughts before I go on to another one?
It just gives us what I see more control in trying to achieve the policy goals that we're trying to achieve, right? In terms of who we're funding and how we're moving, right? So to me, it's a very direct way of doing that, which I'm in support of.
I like this idea too. Did this come from community feedback or just talk amongst staff and?
This came from the type of community feedback of like our operating support grant has become quite small,
Too small.
and we thought that it was a goal to,
Yeah.
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 I like it. I think we probably, if we make this change, we need to leave it alone for several years so people can stop saying, we just need to know what our target is, because we do keep moving the ball on people. But this
So-
does give us more control.
So this maintains the chart that I have shown over and over of if you're a large in this category, you get 1.8%, you're eligible for the 1.8 if you're in this category. So it's keeping those, which right now are not really based in a realistic budget, but it is keeping those core measures that we then apply a scale, and we have more control over that scale. And so if we were to further sort of flesh this out, I think what we would bring back to you, well, this is a question probably in the legal review. I don't know if we need to determine these numbers right now or if that's at the allocation phase. But this is a method, and we can clearly write the method out.
So your question is, do we vote on these allocation ranges, or does the commission as a whole? Do you know what I'm saying in terms of the hype?
Well, if the language were to be, what's going on here? I don't have it printed. It could be that the award allocations will be determined. Basically, what I'm saying is, I'm not sure that in our guidelines, we need to upfront say 20% or whatever the number is will be allocated to large, right? I think that is at the allocation phase. But we would need to describe the method that total allocations will be based on budget categories.
I have a question on a slightly different topic, but in the past year, in the past grant cycle, we allowed operational grants to use their score from last year. Do we need some sort of policy recommendation to reverse that
Oh, yeah.
in the coming
Yeah, we are,
grant cycle?
we don't have a slide for it, but we are recommending that we no longer do that. And so it's just been on our mind as something we're definitely bringing you to approve, that we didn't even put it on the slide here, but every applicant will receive a panel review. If you go to the next slide, next. This is just option 3, which I am less interested in making a recommendation for you here, but this would be transforming the model away from the categories that people are aware of. These are, again, hypothetical. I've heard cases for increasing the budget ranges. I've heard cases for decreasing the budget ranges. For example, here I've eliminated micro because I have heard feedback of, everything is quite more expensive right now. Labor costs more, supplies cost more. That's going to keep going up. Like that $25,000 micro threshold should actually be much higher. On the flip side of that, we know that many of our organizations that we serve are losing funding sources right now, right? And that maybe we need to think about in the opposite direction. And so this is just a third way, which is right now not the one that we are recommending, but we wanted to show you the options that we have thought through where we adjust our budget categories. It could be hypothetically as shown on the screen here. We would then assign a new percentages for awards and then assign, basically rebuilding the model on the same kind of framework, but with new numbers at each level and tier. But for the sake of not changing, again, this is not the recommended path forward that we're making right now.
Because this feels like a more radical change, which would not fit our goal of making not radical changes this year.
Okay, if you go to the next slide, it's the last one, and I know we are running up on a quarter of an hour left here. So this is a summary of what I went through. Go ahead to the next one. Okay, so our final way to improve the operating funding formula that we are bringing is to introduce what we're calling a transition threshold for organizations that are 10% over the budget maximum. And so in this case, the award size would be calculated as the midpoint between two categories. And so what we mean by this is if it's $500,000 is the threshold for a medium to a mid-sized organization. If you are $510,000, you are within this transition threshold where you would kind of fall off a cliff with that transition. So we're introducing a midpoint to address some of the flaws in the model, some of the data anomalies. I've called it making it a hill instead of a cliff. And so we can, it makes sense if we're looking at it visually. I don't have a visual here for you, but that's what this is about, is using a midpoint for those ones that are just over the budget transition category.
And then also just to note, this is something that can be implemented regardless of what decision is made about the actual funding formula itself, whether we keep it the exact same, whether we go forward with the recommendation of the proportion percentages. This is not something that has to be connected with any specific funding formula. And we find that, like Ashley was saying, that it provides a softer transition in terms of being in between, or, individuals and organizations are losing funding. And so if they happen to drop down or find themselves in a new category that they've never been in before, of course, within that 10%, it'll allow a little bit of cushion.
And I remember when we were looking at the data, there were just a few organizations, right? It's not very many, but they're just kind of like that little outlier, right? Data point where they are. And so this would allow them, this would address that, which I think is really helpful. So, yeah.
Okay, I think we have one more slide. This is about dual eligibility, which we mean for organizations that apply for both Thrive and operating. And we wanted to put it on the screen here and bring it for a discussion because this has come up as a point of confusion and change in the last two cycles. And so our objective here is to clearly define the policy of if this is allowed or if this will be allowable in our policy goals and objectives that we're trying to accomplish through our funding strategies here in the guidelines for this year. And so points to consider here, just the brief history. FY24, FY25 was when small or micro organizations were eligible to apply for operating as well as Thrive support, and then in different ways it changed both years. That's the very brief history, and that decision was reversed where there was not dual eligibility. I'm calling it dual eligibility anymore. And so just other points to consider, and we've started to talk about this when we're talking about the funding model, but as Thrive funding has grown, there's been confusion over which grant our smallest organizations should apply to, right? We heard that in the appeals process as well. I think it's important to just state, Thrive is project funds, operating support is general operating support funds. So those are different uses and different kinds of impacts on the organization. They also use a different scoring methodology. And that's, I'm naming these things because we have to holistically think about how the policies interact with each other. And so what I mean by that is for our operating grants, that's really like a pass-fail method where if you score above the minimum threshold, you qualify for the grant, versus the Thrive funding formula as currently is, and no recommendation for change, is a rank-ordered one. So the sort of element of scoring and competition is different there. And then finally, when we think about this, we know that Thrive was designed to support individual artists or groups that do not hold 501c3 status. We know that Thrive has also, the amount of resources to Thrive has grown over the years, right? So it has become accessible to more. But the question still is, does this dual eligibility unfairly privilege organizations in a way that we don't intend, right? And so we just wanted to bring this for conversation because for 2 years in a row, it's been a point of confusion and frustration. And so does anyone have any questions around?
Can organizations, if we don't do dual eligibility, can an organization opt to apply for Thrive for a project?
As of right now, no.
Okay,
If we keep current guidelines.
okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
It got,
The way it
there's
was,
lots of confusion this cycle.
yeah.
I'm happy that we made the distinction here too between, operating as that kind of general operating funding, which can be used for salaries, it can be used for things, and then Thrive is for project funding and supporting artists. I noticed that one option is to think about certain categories like micro or small organizations, that those organizations might apply for both Thrive and operating. I'm wondering if you can say more about that, like as an option. Yeah.
Yeah, so that is what it was when applications opened the last 2 cycles. If you are in the micro or small category, that you could apply for both. That decision for, a variety of reasons changed within those cycles. And so the applicant had to choose or had chosen for them which grant to receive. And so most often it was they received whichever one was the largest of the two. One example that I think of is we have a new first-time operating organization that is in the micro category that has a very, very small budget, but they meet all the criteria for receiving an operating grant, and their operating grant came out to be just under $1,000 with the way the funding formula that we have. And so I did a one-on-one with them a couple weeks ago, and they were saying, well, we applied for operating because we need operating support for our organization, but had we applied for Thrive, that would have allowed us to do some project work that would have probably been more beneficial to the growth of our organization, right? And so part of it is that by having the exclusivity maybe of choosing one or the other, it's kind of, it makes it a harder conversation to kind of support.
And some of these micro and small organizations, their operating grants are quite low. And so they're just talking about, paying their people a little bit for the work that a lot of them are doing probably for free, right? While also providing support for, as you said, a specific project that could be transformative potentially for them or for the community. And so that seems to me like a good use of both of these kinds of funds, because I don't, and I know the staff is in agreement, like the having to choose between the two are like, I think is not the right comparison, because they're two different things completely. And so
I do want to add another perspective to the conversation, is that Thrive is project funding, and while project funding does have a different functionality, Thrive at its core is for the individual artist or for the group of individual artists that are working together. And I think as we talk about lack of access or funding for arts reducing for various external reasons across the country, I think it's really important that we keep at its core that Thrive was for the individual and our operating grants were for an organization. And so one of the ways that I've kind of looked at this conversation is that when organizations are planning their annual budgets, their projects are essentially their programming. And I'm not saying that they shouldn't be eligible. And I think that's why I was a little bit more on board with like the micro and the smalls having access. But Thrive at its core was for the person who doesn't have the formalized structure of a 501c3 or nonprofit organizations to have access to this artist funding. So I think that that's still super important for us to consider, as while project funding is one thing, operational funding is another thing. At its core, we're doing something that is very unique in the way that we just went through all of this to make sure that we have the ability to fund an individual artist, right? That was the entire point of putting fiscal agency in play. And so I just want to make sure that when we look at the other recommendations, those other recommendations for operating, making those budgets, making those potential awards a little bit larger should hopefully also cover that as well. The transitional period should also help make people not feel the drop off as much. And I just want to make sure that when we talk about Thrive, yes, it's project funding, but it's different in its creation. And I just don't want us to walk away from that as a way to fund. Think about it this way. Operating organizations have the ability to get funding through op grants, potential fiscal agency if they decide to do that, and then we're adding a third avenue with Thrive. I just want to make sure that when we're considering that, most individuals through Thrive do not have the ability to apply for operating. So it means at a minimum, they'll just have the one option for funding. So just, these are kind of the conversations that we're having, taking in the feedback that we're getting from the community, that if we do this, we have to make sure that we're really considering that last sentence of dual eligibility and whether or not it privileges one group over another. So
I totally agree.
Yeah.
I totally agree that, like, in terms of thinking about like the purpose, and I think that's really important, right, to remember kind of the origin of Thrive and what we're trying to do. I think my point about kind of the small and micro too, though, is that some of those smaller organizations, their budgets are so small that they're an organization, but they're really just like one or two people. They're more closely associated, I guess, with one artist. And so, I don't know, I guess I'm thinking about what could be transformative to, as you're saying, like both artist projects, but also some of these organizations in the community who really need operating funds as well, I think. So, I'm hearing all of it. What were you saying?
So it feels more like an apology that they're small or micro, and they have the opportunity. Oh, I am on. I'm not. Oh, sorry. It doesn't. It feels like we are trying to meet everyone's needs everywhere with a limited amount of money, and we try and it's feeling like fuzzing the lines. Having been a very small organization, I totally understand. But sometimes we really need clear lines that if, and this would be go to the, what was it called? The period, the grant clinic or office hours? That would be the time when they could come in and really discuss what are the advantages to going one way or another way versus us trying to maybe unfairly privilege. I'm not really sure. As a small micro-organizations, I don't feel they would. At some point, if somebody could come in and see us as being more accommodating to somebody else than the whole picture, why couldn't a large organization, and I get it, they have a line item for programming, I'm just talking broadly, why couldn't a larger organization, a medium organization, apply for operating and a specific special program? And that's where I think that we have to be careful that we can't do everything. We have a limited budget. We will always have a limited budget.
I agree. I think it's more thinking about the policy. It's kind of the same way we think about like the different levels and the percentages and stuff. Like it's really a policy decision. It's like where do we want to direct the most kind of funding for? And it will be, whenever we make a decision, right, it'll be scrutinized, or it won't be. We're not going to be able to do the same things. But I know, like thinking about the limited budget and being able to do both. And then also to your point, Sydney, about the increase in, if we do change the percentages, this will be, I think, very helpful, right, for micro to get more operating funds. And I think that's excellent.
Helps us stay on our operating versus project and staying true to Thrive and those artists who don't have
Yeah.
any kind of support or don't have an office or they're just one artist doing this.
Yeah.
It keeps it truer by using the recommended formula. It should help keep things truer to supporting
Yeah.
all these artists and community of artists.
I'm wondering, there's no way for us to really know, like, how many, except anecdotally, right, just from whatever, how many people wanted to apply for both. Or you know what I'm saying? Like, I guess I don't know. Like, if people could apply for both, how many people would have, or I know that's impossible to figure out. And so this is very helpful, this conversation, to see, like, thinking about the integrity of Thrive.
I was also going to say another little asterisk here. It wasn't just about having one in operating and Thrive. I think this was also a Band-Aid to there being multiple like a lead artist being the multiple, like on multiple different projects within Thrive. So it might have not even have been that they had an operating and a Thrive. It might have been that they had multiple Thrive that they were attached to as well. So like when we're working on that wording, I think it's one thing to like want to support the project funding, but then it's another thing to just make multiple applications available again. I think that's two different avenues that we have to work out here. Yeah.
Was there a recommendation on this?
We did not put a recommendation on right now for this discussion. Because, yeah, we did think that this would benefit from the discussion that we have right now.
I also think too, like Commissioner Wade isn't here to be a part of this discussion too, so I'm thinking that we could have time, right, to discuss, especially if we can get we could have time to both discuss this and vote on it next time with the full committee.
Yeah, do we want to look at the timeline, which I think is the next one here? And so I'm aware that it's 3:01 right now. And so I'm just going to quickly go through this because this kind of, what's on the screen you have here on your table. But, as we said when we started this meeting, we originally thought that we would be bringing you guidelines for approval right now. I think through this conversation, hopefully you've seen why we chose not to. In addition to having this conversation, just like the support materials that we need, like for fiscal sponsorship, we have additional things just to make sure that things are ready on our end. So we are here today on May 19th. I am scheduled to go to the Apple Committee tomorrow to provide an informational update. I keep it as one of my priorities to stay in touch with committee council members there. And so I'm on the agenda for tomorrow just to give an update about where we are, hear from Metro Arts, answer their questions. And then we'll have commission on Thursday of this week. And so, Chair, we can talk about, what update you think it would be helpful to share with the commission there. Yeah. But then thinking about what comes next, if we really look at June 26 is the next commission. So if we want to do guideline approvals there and we kind of walk that back, we have June 16th. Vivian, make sure that I get that date right. I think that date is correct. That is correct. Is when we would have our next grant committee meeting. And so backing out from there, a Monday for June 16th is a Monday. The previous Thursday is when we would aim to give you all as committee members those guidelines for approval. And so that really backs us up to having our guidelines and criteria to legal for their review starting on May 30th. Tessa, of course, correct me if that is not correct line of thinking on my part. So we have until right now, essentially until May 30th. And so we are, of course, happy to talk with any commissioners individually outside of this commission or outside of this committee meeting before we get to those dates ahead of us. And then just kind of walking forward instead of walking backwards, if we approve our guidelines at commission on June 26, our various council legislation filing deadlines happen nearly immediately. Again, Tessa, any corrections that I need here, I'll talk with you as needed. But we would pretty immediately file after we have commission. And that would get us on the agenda for council approval on July the 15th. And so I'll be making sure that I have time with the Apple Committee before that to be able to answer their questions. And then assuming that that goes well on July the 15th, that would put us at opening up applications. We would aim to be ready the following day to open applications up for a month. So we have that July to August. And then technical review, that short curing period that we talked about, community panel reviews, and then that puts us approving grants in September. My request on the timeline here is that we move our grants committee meeting to the 4th. September. Did I get that right? Yeah. The 4th Monday, because our standing meeting on the 3rd would make it hard for us to turn around and process information from community review panels to what we would want, just to make sure that we have time there. And so that would put us approving awards on September the 25th. We could have award announcements ready the next day, a 2-week or so period to collect information we need from grantees, contracts, payments. So again, this still allows us to execute this timeline by the end of this calendar year. It'll just be closer to the end of the calendar year instead of closer to the end of October.
So can I ask a clarifying question about Thursday's commission meeting and what can be discussed? I know that it's policy that we discuss here, right? And then we take recommendations to commission, but some of these things that we've been discussing, given the May 30th and kind of what we're trying to do, is it appropriate, or are we able to discuss that as a full commission under that agenda item? Is that appropriate?
Yeah, you can discuss it. it would be part of your committee report. Are you asking if the full commission can vote on some of these?
No, I'm not asking about voting. I think I was just asking about, we can discuss it as a full commission on Thursday, like continue this discussion.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so I'm also going to plan to go to Apple tomorrow. And by the way, thanks to everyone who came to the budget last week. Thank you for going. The next steps would be that maybe we can talk about the agenda item on Thursday and flesh out kind of some of the ways we might want to grease the wheel, I guess, and have some conversations so that we can be ready. And then again, I'd like to loop Commissioner Wade in on this discussion as well through some individual things. Does this make sense?
We would have the individual conversations, yeah.
You would have the, because we can't, I can't, no, not going to have individual conversations.
The commission this week would be an
staff will.
opportunity as well.
Yes,
Yeah.
and the commission would be an opportunity. Okay, that's great. All right, well, I think as it is late, is there any new business, or can we kind of wrap up?
No new business that I can think of.
Okay, great. Well, this has been very helpful. It was very helpful to have all of this thought. My thanks to the staff, all of us, for putting this together and for their thoughtful work in thinking about this. And I'm so glad to have these conversations publicly, and just want to be transparent as we think about these changes. And I will, if anyone has it, take a motion to, however you do this, adjourn. Okay, we're done. We are done. We are done for the day. Thank you. Okay.
This has been a service of the Metro Nashville Network. If you would like to see this presentation again, or for more information on this and other programs, visit nashville.gov.